The following program is a production of Naleo TV.
Contested case hearing for the 30-meter telescope project, a proceeding for the State of Hawaii, DLNR, Board of Land and Natural Resources.
Everybody, may I please ask for appearances?
Morning, Your Honor. John Pete Minot and Ian Sanderson appearing for the University of Hawaii.
Good morning, Mr. Minot.
Hello, Kealoha Pisciotta for Kealoha Pisciotta, Mauna Kea Nainaho, and Paul Nevis. And here with me is Keomailani Von Go.
All right, good morning, Mr. Pisciotta.
Good morning, Harry Ferguson.
Good morning, Mr. Ferguson.
Good morning, Clarence Kukawakahi Ching.
Good morning, Mr. Ching.
Good morning, Your Honor. Ross Shinyama and Jeff Ono for TMT International Observatory.
Good morning, Mr. Shinyama.
Good morning, Your Honor. Newton Chu on behalf of Perpetuating Unique Educational Opportunities.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chu. Good morning.
Aloha, mehana kihoi, and my daughter Kalaula, who had a Teachers Institute day from school.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Good morning, Kalaula. Good morning, Ms. Kihoi.
Good morning, Your Honor. Dexter Kaiama on behalf of Kahea.
Good morning, Mr. Kaiama.
Morning, Dwight Vicente.
Good morning, Mr. Vicente.
Aloha, Cindy Freitas.
Aloha, Mrs. Freitas.
Aloha, William Freitas.
Aloha, Kakahiyaka, Mr. Freitas.
Oh, aloha, kakahiyaka, makako. For the record, I would like to say that I have my witness, Greg Johnson, and his lovely wife. And if it's okay that they sit with me
Yes.
as we discuss, as we present today.
My understanding is Mr. Johnson will go first
Yes.
in the witnesses,
Yes.
and Mrs. Johnson will be assisting in the technical equipment.
Yes. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Aloha. Oh, yes. And Dexter Kaiama will present my witness.
Okay, so
And he will be doing the redirect.
So this is what I'm going to suggest, if it's okay. So it would be as though you are presenting the witness, but Mr. Kaiama will be in your stead. So when Kahea's time to cross-examine, I will give you the chance to do that because that's your client. And for Mr. Freitas, he will not have an opportunity to cross-examine.
Okay, so you won't have a chance to cross-examine. So Mr. Freitas cannot cross-examine Mr. Johnson?
Right. It would be redirect because it's his witness.
Okay. But I would be doing the redirect, Your Honor.
You would be doing the redirect.
Okay, but he still wouldn't be cross-examining.
Right.
Okay, so that's what you got to think of. So that's what I got to think. So even if you are the presenter, you cannot cross-examine. And if I'm the presenter, you cannot cross-examine. So,
Okay, we'll just leave it like that.
Okay.
That's it. Okay, well understood. I
Okay.
was
Thank you.
hoping that I could cross-examine.
Yes, I didn't know
if you
that.
presented.
But Mr. Kaiama, I'm assuming that you're in to assist because of your legal background.
and to try to help facilitate and move things as quickly as possible.
Right,
Yes.
but the person presenting doesn't have a cross-examination because their presentation is the direct testimony. That's the reason we're doing it this way. But Kahea is not, you're doing it as a courtesy.
Yes.
So Kahea still has the right to cross-examine.
Okay, thank you, Your Honor.
All right?
Okay. So in the same instance as what I watched yesterday, as Kalani Flores was able to cross-examine one of his witnesses.
Yeah, but he did that
But-
because there were two people presenting. So he
Yeah.
cross-examined on the Kihoi written direct testimony.
Okay.
So, and Ms. Kihoi had the right to cross-examine on the Flores written direct testimony.
Okay.
So that's why we were able to present one witness one time.
Okay.
So with two different lines of testimony.
All right.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you,
Aloha.
Mr. Freitas. Good morning, Mrs. Holy. Anyone else that needs to make a appearance? Okay, let me confirm those that are not here. Mrs. Case and Professor Flores. Okay, absent today. Debbie Ward is absent today. CM Kanuha. CM Kanuha. Not present. Joseph Kamara. Joseph Kamara. Not present. Ms. Kiuhoi, I forgot to ask you if you're also noting the absence of Ms. Slightholm? Yes? Okay, thank you. And Lanny Sinkin. Lanny Sinkin. Not present. Kalikulehua Kanaile. I think he might be working based on what he said yesterday. So, absent. Stephanie Tabata. Stephanie Tabata. Not present. Tiffany Kakalia. Tiffany Kakalia. Not present. Glenn Keela. Glenn Keela. Not present. Brandon Kealoha. Brandon Kealoha. Not present. And I believe we have our first witness, Mrs. Freitas, or, no, sorry, Mr. Freitas, through Mr. Kaiama. Mr. Freitas or Mr. Kaiama, do you wish to present your first witness?
My apologies, Your Honor.
It's okay.
Okay. Yes, Your Honor. On behalf of Mr. Freitas, I would at this time like to call to the witness stand Professor Greg Johnson.
Thank you. Professor Johnson, and while Professor Johnson is making his way to the witness stand, may I ask for an offer of proof?
Yes, Your Honor. Professor Johnson is a professor of religion and indigenous studies at the University of Colorado. His research focuses on contemporary religious life in the context of legal struggles. Dr. Johnson has conducted research in Hawaii for 20 years and has published extensively about religion and law, including with regard to sacred sites. In particular, Dr. Johnson has written about administrative procedures and religion, including with reference to the state of Hawaii and the DLNR. Today, he will address CDUA criteria 5 and 8. He will also address the sacred status of Mauna Kea, the events of June 24th and 25th, 2015, the building and consecration of the ahu on the proposed TMT site, and the ramifications of these for the permitting process.
Thank you, Mr. Kaiama. And I understand Mrs. Johnson will be assisting. Would you please identify her as well?
Yes, Your Honor. Standing to the back of me is Mrs. Johnson, Professor Johnson's wife.
Does she have a first name?
It's Carrie, Your Honor. Excuse me. I was told it, but I forgot this morning. So.
Carrie Johnson?
Yes.
All right. Thank you and welcome. All right.
I believe Carrie Robinson. Yes.
Mr. Kaiama?
Yes, Your Honor.
Carrie Robinson?
Yes, Carrie Robinson.
All right.
Yes.
Got it. All right. Thank you.
It's those small details. Sorry, Your Honor.
For the record, it's going to be a big deal because you're going to look back and go, what was her name?
Yes, yes. And I would need her help with the technical support as well. I wouldn't be able to do it.
All right. Thank you.
And just to apologize, I didn't mean to put Mr. Kaiama in that predicament.
He put
as far
himself
as-
there. Don't worry about it.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
I always apologize when things are unknown and then we find out about things.
And I want to thank you, Mr. Freitas, for your patience. I know we had to kind of go through a lot of witnesses to figure out exactly when the Johnsons could appear. So thank you for your patience with us.
Oh, thank you for being patient with me. You know, this is a big process for me, and I don't know why I'm nervous, but I am.
Really?
Yes.
Not to worry. Not to worry. I'm here.
All right.
All right. So, Professor Johnson, thank you for coming. And may I ask you to please state your name into the microphone? We have to turn the button on.
Gregory Johnson.
Looks easy on TV, right?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So, Professor Johnson, may I ask you please to raise your right hand to take the oath? Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in the matters before this tribunal shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you. Professor Johnson, do you happen to have your written direct testimony with you?
I do.
And can you confirm how many pages that is?
The version I have is without the pictures. It is 7 pages.
And as to those pages, and as you sit here under oath, are each of those statements your statements?
Yes.
And are each of those statements true and correct to the best of your knowledge?
With some minor corrections.
Will you make those corrections as you give your up to 10-minute summary?
I could give them right now. They're very brief.
Okay, I'm going to ask that you include that as part of your summary if you don't mind.
Okay.
All right, so every witness has an opportunity to give for up to 10 minutes to summarize their testimony, and you can include the corrections that need to be made.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead.
Okay, the corrections are that my term on the board of the American Academy of Religions, the board of directors, has now ended. So just to get that current. And the workshop I describe for scholars of religion coming here to Hilo to discuss religion and Hawaiian religion and law will be held now in the summer of 2018. Okay. Yep. Okay, thanks.
Thank
First,
you.
you're welcome. First, I just want to say that I'm really honored to be here. This is an incredible process and a testament to democracy as we know it today. And I want to give a shout out to Naleo TV. Because of them, I've been able to stay abreast of many of the proceedings here, and so have my students and other interested people, since it's just a really wonderful thing. And it's a wonderful thing for me as a scholar to be able to see how Hawaiian tradition is being made to live in this very moment, in this very room, really, that people are coming forward, announcing their mana'o, their ike, their perspectives. This is where it happens, and it's really humbling to behold and be part of. And it takes me back to when I first began to learn about Hawaiian religion in Norman, Oklahoma, of all places, at a Federal Review Committee meeting where Hui Malama and the Office of Hawaiian Affairs came to testify against the Roger Williams Museum about a Kiilaau, and how they did so in that public setting, on record, having learned, having talked to aunties, uncles, having gone to archives, having consulted with one another about what does this ki'i mean? How do we stand up for it today? And how do we return it to the tradition itself? Seeing that transpire taught me an invaluable lesson about the intersection of religion and law, and about how tradition lives in these kinds of moments. And I hope I get asked to say a little bit more about that later. Okay, I'm going to read because my statement's a bit dense. This contested case hinges on land use permitting and procedure. In this context, the hearing officer and the BLNR must consider principles and practices of permitting in the state of Hawaii, along with specific aspects of the instant application and the degree to which it satisfactorily meets certain criteria of the CDUA process. Pardon me. Permitting questions at these various levels have recently been considered intensively by the Hawaii State Supreme Court, including in the Super Ferry, Rail, and Kawaiahao Church cases, the latter two involving the DLNR. In all three of these cases, the court found serious problems with permitting practices of state agencies. Cumulatively, these cases amount to a clarion call for higher standards of permitting diligence. Valid permitting in such cases entails, as a prior step, meaningful consultation with those affected, including religious practitioners. I hope one outcome of this contested case process will be exactly this: serious, sustained, and meaningful consultation. My testimony concerns the sacred status of Mauna Kea in general, and with particular reference to two ahu, altars, constructed on the proposed TMT site in June of 2015, and the implication of these ahu for the permitting process. I would like to open by making reference to a stated goal of the permit applicant as found in the CDUA at 2.3.2, page 2-4, in the section entitled Historic Cultural Resources. It reads in part, quote, "Protection of historic and cultural resources has been a major objective in the planning of the proposed TMT project," end quote. My primary aim is not to challenge the degree to which the applicants addressed historic and cultural resources adequately in the CDUA up to the point it was published. Others have addressed those concerns. My point is to insist that religious life on the mountain has been catalyzed, magnified, and otherwise intensified since the time of the CDUA. This is true of religious activity on the mountain in general, and is specifically true of religious practices at the proposed TMT site itself. These reasons, I will argue, warrant review and revision of the CDUA and the accompanying EIS, with particular attention to consultation with affected practitioners and those they serve. Is my pacing okay for you? Okay. My testimony is offered with specific reference to criteria number 5 and number 8 that govern the CDUA process. Criterion number 5 includes the following language, quote, "The proposed land use will be compatible with the locality and surrounding areas and to the physical conditions and capabilities of the specific parcel or parcels," end quote. I have attended to criterion number 5 for the reason that the CDUA addresses cultural beliefs and practices with reference to it, finding anticipated impacts to be, quote, "less than significant." My analysis also pertains to criterion number 8, which reads, quote, "The proposed land use will not be materially detrimental to the public health, safety, and welfare," end quote. Whereas the applicants address this criterion in a narrow framework with regard to Western conceptions of physical health, safety, and welfare, citing, for example, various forms of pollution that might be caused by construction, as a scholar of indigenous religions, I urge the hearing officer and the board to recognize the ways this criterion is of direct relevance to this contested case in terms of significant impacts on the psychological, social, and ultimately physical well-being of Native Hawaiian traditional practitioners, principally through traumatic injuries that would be caused by having a sacred site significantly impacted. And indeed, we heard a good deal about this over the last few days. Now I will turn to the observations that have informed my position. First, I wish to add to my perspective and opinion to those who have testified before me regarding the sacredness of Mauna Kea to members of the Native Hawaiian community. Whether considered from within Hawaiian tradition or in a comparative perspective with reference to other religious landscapes around the world, there is no question as to the sacred character of Mauna Kea. It is quite literally the very ground of Hawaiian tradition, its stories, practices, and prayers. It has long been a nexus point where place, humans, and otherworldly energies are understood to converge and commune. In specifically Hawaiian terms, it is a vahipana, sacred place, where ancestral memories, present actions, and future intentions fuse. It is a kulaiwi, a homeland, in the most palpable sense, a place where humans, bones, and spirits traverse time and dimensionality. It is a place of heightened Kiilaau expressions of form and embodiment, where the most ancient of Hawaiian stories live on in the actions of those who seek to protect Mauna Kea. Beyond looking at history, oral tradition, and academic reports, as a scholar of religion, when attempting to discern what is sacred to a community, I ask, what do they choose to protect? With what commitment and by what means? On Mauna Kea, the commitments of the community stand out in stark relief and in strongly religious ways, including through sustained and exacting ritual activities and occupation of the mountain. Their primary means of protecting Mauna Kea have been through a nonviolent ethic, Kapu Aloha, and through ceremony, including offerings, prayer, song, dance, and chants. Witnessing the protectors in action on the morning of June 24th, 2015, I was immediately struck by their level of conviction, engagement, and their deeply traditional sensibilities and comportment. On these issues, I urge the hearing officer to view the short documentary, Kapu Aloha 101, produced by Oiwi TV and submitted as Exhibit T-1-D. D? As a concrete example of the religious nature of the protest actions, consider the following. On June 24th, as the DLNR officers approached, rather than scatter or react with violence, Lakea Trask, a young cultural practitioner, led his line of protectors in a traditional group purification chant. Such chanting continued all morning, framing the event as one of sacred duty. One chant in particular stood out, an ancient Puli Hui Kala, a group chant, He Mu Oia. Historically intoned during the consecration of temples and during other heightened religious moments, such as the opening of the Opelu season, this chant cleanses, purifies, and wards off threats. In English, the core of He Mu Oia goes thus: defend us from them. Defend us from nightmares, from things in the night and ill omens. Free us. Not incidentally, He Mu Oia was also chanted at the TMT site on June 22nd, 2015, as a group of Native Hawaiian religious practitioners prepared themselves to build and consecrate the first of 2 ahu on the site. I urge the hearings officer to view a video of this at T-1.F. This group included Mr. Freitas, who oversaw construction of the ahu in his capacity as an expert in traditional and customary rockwork, and who carries a deep responsibility to care for the site. I addressed the ahu and my experiences regarding them in my WDT. For a video of the ahu consecration, see T-1.E. Here I would like to summarize the key points of testimony relative to the CDUA and the EIS that stands behind it. The ahu constructed in ceremony now stand as material focal points of living Hawaiian tradition and also as dense symbols of Mauna Kea's sacredness to members of the Native Hawaiian community. In order to establish this point, I will here unpack a few ideas regarding the idea of tradition briefly. Tradition is not a thing, it is a process. Living tradition draws upon the past, but is necessarily constituted in the present. Living traditions are of this world, not only with reference to time, but also with regard to context. The constituent parts of traditions cannot be disarticulated from on-the-ground circumstances. This means traditional practices take place always and everywhere in moments configured by political and legal realities. Food for thought. There is no religious practice that takes place outside of a jurisdiction of some kind. Thus, tradition cannot be meaningfully described without historical, cultural, geographic, political, and legal contextualization. Likewise, in order to be protected, as the State of Hawaii Constitution demands, 12-7, Tradition must be recognized and protected in specific places, times, and jurisdictions. In Hawaii, as in many indigenous contexts, sacred places are often left unto themselves out of deference to their power and sanctity. If threatened, however, the opposite dynamic is triggered as practitioners exercise their kuleana responsibility to care for the sacred. Traditional Hawaiian religious practices should be understood in this manner in the past and present. As is well known, many heiau and ahu were historically constructed in moments of struggle. In such moments, ancestors, deities, and other forces were called upon to assist the people trying to protect them. Aspects of Hawaiian religious life today follow this pattern. Tradition is manifest in action when catalyzed by circumstances, most especially when the very ground of tradition itself is threatened. Sacred places, places regarded as having ties to oral traditions, healing, burial, and worship practices, thus receive focused attention precisely when they are threatened. This is how I understand expressions of living tradition on Mauna Kea today, and it is the framework for my opinion that the ahu, the altars, constructed on the TMT proposed site in days immediately prior to the mass protest of June 24th, 2015, are expressions of living Hawaiian tradition and deserve protection as such. Acting in a traditional manner, a group of Native Hawaiian ritual practitioners constructed 2 ahu and conducted ceremony at them. Subsequently, these same practitioners, and especially William Freitas, have taken on the responsibility to care for these religious sites through ministering to them with regular offerings and ceremony. In this way, tradition has been sustained on Mauna Kea and is an expression of deeply held traditional beliefs, evidence of sincere religious action in a moment of crisis. Therefore, based on my reading of the relevant documents and on my understanding of the facts, the hearing officer and the DLNR appear to be faced with a choice. Either disregard the ahu as instances of living Hawaiian tradition and thus allow the EIS and CDUA to stand mute with reference to them, or acknowledge the ahu as significant expressions of tradition, considering them and the communities who worship at them to be relevant to this proceeding. If the latter view is taken, then the demands of due process should trigger reconsideration of Section 3.2 of the EIS entitled Cultural Practices and Beliefs. This section of the EIS includes the following statement at 3-21, quote, "The following practices and beliefs have been considered traditional and customary in previous studies. Performance of prayer and ritual observances important for the reinforcement of an individual's Hawaiian spirituality, including the erection of ahu or shrines," end quote. The EIS states that the proposed site contains no ahu other than, quote, "one near the end of the four-wheel drive road in Area E," end quote. That is not making reference to the 2 that I am making reference to. The EIS also quotes Ed Stevens at 3.2, 3-15, who is reported to have said, quote, "The site that they picked is free of bona fide historic treasures," end quote. It is important here to state the obvious. The authors of the EIS were able to reach this conclusion because the ahu did not exist on the site at the time the EIS was written. Simply put, the ahu, now undeniably present, were not accounted for in the determination of no significant impact, or less than significant impact. Were the telescope to be built on the planned site, this would entail removal of the now present ahu. Here, 3.1.2 of the EIS is relevant. Quote, "Thresholds used to determine level of impact," end quote. It notes that HRS section 11-200-12 provides 13 significance criteria against which an action is to be evaluated in order to assess its potential action. Numbers 1, 2, 4, and 5 are particularly germane here. Number 1 reads, quote, involves an irrevocable commitment to loss or destruction of any cultural resource. Number 2 reads, quote, curtails the range of beneficial uses of the environment, end quote. Number 4, substantially affects the cultural practices of the community or state. Number 5, substantially affects public health. Based on the sections of the EIS I have underscored, the EIS itself designates contemporary Ahu construction as traditional and customary practice that should trigger assessment, and acknowledges that destruction of such a site would constitute a, quote, significant impact. Concluding now. Here I would like to turn from the EIS to the CDUA. If the Ahu are considered to be significant manifestations of living Hawaiian tradition, then the CDUA itself needs to be revisited, particularly with reference to 4.1.4, in which Ahu construction and the leaving of offerings are described as traditional practices, and 4.2.1, which reads in part, quote, the project is not anticipated to significantly impact the resources available on Mauna Kea used for traditional and customary Native Hawaiian rites involving pilgrimage, prayer, shrine construction, and offerings, end quote.
Okay, Professor Johnson.
I just have 4 more lines.
Oh, of course. I'm sorry. I thought you were concluded.
Dramatic effect. You know.
Oh, sorry to have done that.
Religious life on Mauna Kea has changed since and because of the CDUA. These changes are significant and should be accounted for in the permitting process. In other words, a lot has happened since those papers were filed, and a responsible permitting process should account for them. The United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples holds out such an ideal, and the United States is a signatory to that document. As a scholar of religion, it is my opinion that the Ahu are significant sites of cultural belief and practice on a mountain generally held to be sacred by many Hawaiians. On this basis, I respectfully urge the hearings officer and the BLNR to require the permit applicant to revise and resubmit relevant sections of the EIS and CDUA in the interest of due process. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Johnson. Of course, you know you went quite a bit beyond the 10 minutes, but I allowed that to happen with the intent that this initial testimony would summarize your views. So the next part of the process is cross-examination. I am going to ask you to listen carefully to the questions and to answer them directly. I'm going to ask you not to simply launch into further elaboration unless it is specifically required or requested. Okay?
Understood.
All right, fair enough. Ms. Pisciotta?
Aloha. Good to meet you. Thank you for your testimony.
You're welcome.
And and for your ike about some of this stuff.
Mahalo.
Let me ask you, who were your teachers regarding Hawaiian and cultural tradition?
Thank you for asking. In graduate school at the University of Chicago, I had the great pleasure and luck, frankly, to train with Marshall Solins, famous anthropologist of the Pacific and of Hawaii in particular. But my teaching, my learning really began here in Hawaii. I had met Kekuni Blaisdell in Boulder, Colorado, as he visited one of my classes in the late 1990s, and introduced myself. And I had been following Hawaiian issues in a federal context for a little bit of time, so got to know him briefly. And he gave me his card, and he said, "Call me when you come, when and if you come." Some years later, I call him, and I said, "Do you remember me?" And he says, "Yeah, I remember." And I said, "Well, I'm coming to Hawaii now." And he said, "No, you're not." And I said, "Oh." He says, "You're coming to Kapai Aina." And that's when my learning began. And then I said, he says, "What are you coming for?" I said, "I'm coming to learn about your religions." He says, "No, you're not." And then I knew I was dealing with a Jedi master. And he says, "You're coming to learn about Papa and Wakea. You're coming to learn about haloa. You're coming to learn about Piko, Po, and Ao, Mai, Ho'ailona." I said, "Wow, okay, I guess." And indeed I was. Then through Kekuni, I met Atwood Makanane, and he was an important teacher as well. Most importantly, my teachers have been Edward Halealoha Ayao. I work specifically with burial protections and repatriation, and Dana Naone Hall and Isaac Hall. Conversation partners have included Tai Kavika Tengen, Kealani Kawanui, John Charlot, Guy Kalukukui, Kai Markel, among others. So thank you for asking.
Oh, all cherished people, even some family.
Pardon me, Professor Johnson, would you mind during the recess writing those names down so we can get the correct spelling?
Yeah, here you go.
Thank you. Please go forward.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned Kiilaau case in your opening. Could you just explain why you think that is relevant in this proceeding?
Yeah, thank you for asking. So this was a Federal Review Committee meeting, so an open quasi-judicial meeting, not unlike this, of deliberation around a ki'i, or a statue of significance for some Hawaiian religious practitioners, Kiilaau, probably from Maui, held by the Roger Williams Museum. For me, why it was so important is a number of reasons, but to see how religious evidence was presented and discussed by practitioners in an open public process, and what that meant for the tradition. And specifically, it was real eye-opening to see that Hui Malama and the Office of Hawaiian Affairs representatives weren't just talking about the ki'i. They were engaging the ki'i. It was a living aspect of their sensibility, of their identity, their commitment, and also, what I mentioned briefly before, that they had to do tremendous learning in order to make that case. In other words, the dispute was itself a catalyst for tradition to be articulated, lived, embodied. And I think the Mauna Kea context is very much doing that. As a scholar of religion, whatever the outcome here, Hawaiian tradition is profoundly alive at this moment in this room. It's amazing to me. So I came to that sensibility in that meeting and realized, Hawaiians have a lot going on. So thank you for asking.
Yeah, mahalo. Also, okay, you did mention Exhibit T-1 point D.
Yes.
The Kapu Aloha 101. Could you tell us, what this video is about, why it's important, and an important reference here?
Yeah, I think this is foundational and of material relevance to this proceeding. Actions on the mountain in a religious way have been governed by Kapu Aloha, an ethical sensibility that's been articulated at so many different levels. And I teach my students about this when we're trying to understand contemporary living traditions. And I've seen no document that better describes Kapu Aloha 101 and William Freitas' role in abiding by it and perpetuating it. So I would ask, I think it's so relevant that I would ask that we view the video briefly. Yeah, just pull what you think. No, take that one down, please. Yeah.
Okay, so
it's an exhibit.
I understand.
Yeah.
I just want to make clear that it's Exhibit T1.
T-1.D.
Point D, and if you don't have any objection, Ms. Pisciotta, it's fine to show it, but we are not going to record it because it's already
Yes, that's fine.
in the uploaded document.
Okay.
Okay.
Sure.
Would that be all right with you?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I'm just going to stand in the back, though, so let it play.
Sure.
Correct.
I'll be right there.
Oh, yes. Yeah, correct. Thank you. You may need to shrink it and then press refresh. Can you shrink it again? No. Slide it over if you can. Diminish it. Can you diminish the box to where you're given a reload option? And then up in the, see if there's a reload. Further over, perhaps? This is normally where I ask one of my students to come up and save me.
We stand in Kapu Aloha, regardless of what they bring at us. We stand in Kapu Aloha, we stand in Aloha Aina, we stand on truth.
Kapu Aloha, it is the way you carry yourself. It has dignity and uprightness and integrity for your land and your kupuna and your makua and for all things around it. It is a consideration for something outside of yourself.
Because we are pono in everything that we do. So please, I ask of everybody, hold yourself to your highest standards. Create new standards today. And hold yourself to that. And once you get to that point, make them even higher.
And people, that's where the confusion is. People think, oh, aloha, aloha. But they're looking at an institutionalized and commercialized version of aloha. We're talking about aloha that kia'is the land. We're talking about an aloha that kia'is their families. People are very frustrated by that strategy because they have no understanding of where it's coming from, that it's something that's made up. In reality, it is a long-standing practice we've always had. We've always had. We're calling it Kapu Aloha now, yet it was in our lua, and it was in our principles of, even on a battlefield, of how to enter into a battle with deep integrity.
na moi no ino na moi moi ana puno no na haunia he mu oia he mu eli eli no yeah
It is good to have anger, you know, but how to redirect that anger into positive means, now that is Kapu Aloha. You have a beloved name of ours that we cherish and honor, Kamakau, one of our great historians, you know. And we know the battle is not with you. It is when you look at the Pico and the Mole, we are at the root and we are Ohana, we are family. And we're in a system that's dividing and separating us, you know, only by appearance. the Kapu Aloha that we hold is for you specifically because of your who you, and how they've chosen you to come forward to us. It's hard, you know.
And the feelings are mutual. Trust me, I have a hard time, but I got to do my job.
Okay, Kali. We go where we go. We see them again. And we will not have any physicality that there was.
I saw her away, and as she was away, she was sincere, so sincere that the DLNR officer would put his hand on top there. Now me as a makua, trying to maintain Kapu Aloha, I almost had to resist myself from breaking that Kapu Aloha. I protected my daughter as best as I could by telling him, don't touch my daughter. You can talk to her. How would you like someone to touch your daughter? And I saw the emotions of their face change because it made him realize that they're doing something that could happen to their own family one day. It was a very testing moment for me at that moment. And I had to maintain my composure and understand what I'm there for, and to help this young kane to maintain their Kapu Aloha. And Kapu Aloha means to also not put upon hewa to anybody, including the officers that we faced that day.
You know, so we need to change the thinking. Old paradigm is act in defiance, act in vengeance, act in anger, act in these ways to protect, to defend.
Excuse me, were you at your rights?
We need to move, to defend already. When you say, look at what's up there, national defense. To defend, you lose. Once you buy into, I gotta defend this place, means you already bought into a place where it's going to keep you there. You're going to constantly act in defiance, act in vengeance, act in anger. It's a cycle.
To explain that to a young kane, it's very difficult because they have this cool energy in them. And with that cool energy, as young kane, we as makua or elders, we have to teach them how to control that cool energy.
For the Keiki of the future!
There has been instances in these last couple of days where I took it upon my kuleana to help these young men to proceed with Kapu Aloha. So it was very intense moments. Explaining the Kapu Aloha to them, understanding that they're needed to maintain that Kapu Aloha and keep that humbleness as best as you can. If you cannot, then you just remove yourself from the situation and go down and cool down. We have to continue to move forward with this protection of Mauna Kea.
What's his charges? We haven't heard any.
Ha'awina aloha o hana keia. Ea, pela kanohona. Pono e makaukau no na wā mai ka ia me na wā paakiki. Ulu ke kanaka maka wā paakiki. Ale nui ka ulu maka wā maalahi. Ea, like me kea o lelo au na kanaka au kai i kaika loa ma ke kai ale ale. Ale, mako imi ke kai malie, Komo, I loko ke kai ma ohi, ke kai ale, a pela e kai, ka koa pau. Ano leila, o kia mau wā paakiki, he wā e ulu ai ke kanaka, he wā e ho ulu I ka pilina, e ho ulu I ka hilinai, ina hiki ke holo mua, lana kila maluna o kela mau pilikia, e ho I kaika iana, ma hou kākou, nona wā hiki mai ana.
The deep family, the relationship we have is beyond any kind of uniform or any size. It's about how do we gather at the root of what's here in a system that would act otherwise. How do we see it from those who are standing as the protectors to those who are standing on the side to arrest the protectors?
We have to fight for our people. We will be gone if we don't work together. Love this place. We must show this world we love this place. We must show the world we love this place.
How do we bring unity to that eha that's there? You see the process. You see the system that we're all caught in. And you look at eye to eye. It takes a deep, humbling relationship and loving to say, how do we do this better? How can we do this better? We forget there is a spiritual movement that has not been recognized fully. We have tools that have been passed on to us through the oli, through the chant, through the mele, through the mo'opuauhau, through the mo'olelo, that really allow you, that encourage and empower you to act in right, in good stead. And it is about being present, acknowledging that, and it acknowledges you, plain and simple.
Again, hello everybody. From myself, I apologize to you guys.
I understand what I gotta do. And you may not accept it. I gotta do my job. I'm really, really sorry. Okay? Our number one thing right now is public safety. We're not going up. We love you guys. We love you guys. We love you guys.
Okay. Hawaii, koko Hawaii.
Ms. Pisciotta? Not much left.
Mahalo.
If I might, you had asked about the relevance.
Yes, please.
Now that we've seen it.
I think that, Professor Johnson, I'm going to wait for another question if you don't mind.
By all means.
Can you just briefly explain why you think this is just very relevant right here, right now?
Thank you.
And I'm going to ask you to be very succinct.
I'm a professor.
I understand that. That's why I had to ask.
Here comes succinct.
And we had a very long video.
Yeah,
That's the
thank
reason
you.
I need to ask
and
you.
I do have other exhibits, but they're very short, on the order of 30 seconds later, perhaps, if asked. Well,
Okay.
Okay.
Succinct.
Succinct. Thank you. I was there. I was filming adjacent to Lakea's line. It was absolutely powerful. Seeing, hearing, that experience was really powerful to understand the living quality of Hawaiian religion, spirituality on that place at that time, and that it had a deep, deep history, was being expressed in the present, no doubt was going to ramify into the future. And to teach about these issues in my classroom, about the religious ethic invoked on the mountain as Kapu Aloha, that draws upon the very best of Hawaiian tradition, but also Martin Luther King Jr., Gandhi, other sources that I've heard people talk about. It's a coalescing of honorable religious virtues in defense of what one cares about.
Yes. Have you ever heard that Kamehameha Nui, the first mo'i, was one of the first to invoke it? Kapu Aloha?
Thank you. I had not. I knew at Pu'ukohala, in recent ceremony, it's been invoked. I did not know it goes back to Kamehameha himself. Thank you.
Yeah, just during his death, he made that announcement. But I'll share with you.
Please do.
I am done with my questions, and I very, very much appreciate your testimony.
Mahalo.
Mahalo.
Thank you, Ms. Pisciotta. Thank you very much. Mr. Ching?
Good morning.
Morning.
By the way, at that conference in Oklahoma,
Yeah.
what was the outcome?
The outcome was that the Kiilaau was recommended to be repatriated by the review committee. The Roger Williams Museum did not like that outcome, threatened suit on constitutional grounds. An out-of-court settlement took place. The Kiilaau was purchased by Office of Hawaiian Affairs, and as I understand, is still in their possession. Occasionally is brought out for ceremony while its future disposition is being addressed.
Was that Kiilaau used as part of a canoe?
Thank you for asking. That's the one. It's there's much debate, as you may know, but it seems almost certain to have been lashed to the front of a va'a. And whether it was for fishing poles or spears is contested. There was great testimony. I also learned a lot about aumakua in that context of the power of the Kiilaau to manifest certain kinds of aumakua. And another thing I learned in that moment was, frankly, that Hawaiians were on both sides of that dispute, and that the nature of tradition involves internal dispute, because Rubalite Johnson gave testimony on behalf of the museum, as did Herb Kane, so no small testimony, right? And to realize that Hawaiian tradition wasn't on one side or the other, it was in the friction, the generative friction between the sides.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You mentioned Atwood Makanane.
Yeah.
And what did he teach you?
Thank you for asking. He taught me a sensibility for the oral tradition. He was, at that point, living at the Lo'i at UH Manoa, and I came down to visit a number of times. And one time I came down, he had a huge ava bowl. And I thought, oh, wow, good, I get to meet some other people. Such a big ava bowl. And then I realized, no, we have a long night with an ava bowl. And that was because he told me the kumu lipo that night, much of it. It's very long. And then the next morning, without sleeping, we went to conduct the opening protocols for the La Hoihoi Ea at Thomas Square. Yeah.
Have you, what kind of exposure have you had to law schools? Have you attended conferences at law schools? Have you spoken at law schools? What has been your interaction in that respect?
Thank you for asking. It is the case that almost all of my scholarship concerns law in some manner or another, principally burial protection, repatriation, and sacred land laws. I do not have a JD. I did not go to law school. I have sat in on a number of law classes, but most of all, I work with legal scholars in a number of contexts, have lectured at law schools a number of times, was just invited this week to lecture on living tradition at York University Osgood Law School in Toronto. I've published in numerous law venues, including Stanford's law series.
Okay, so I get it that you have quite an association with this island and Hawaiian legal practices here.
Yes.
Is that correct?
And
of course,
in some capacities.
And I'm getting the message that you've also been quite connected with Mauna Kea.
Yes.
And the practice of Hawaiian religion there by contemporary Hawaiians.
Yes.
Would you like to? Could you summarize your basal feelings about this interaction?
Yeah, very briefly, I can do that. I came to learn of events on Mauna Kea in October of 2014, as many people did. I was aware, I have been aware for some decades of issues regarding telescopes and the sacrality of Mauna Kea for some members of the community. But the heightened focus it's received, I became aware of that in October of 2014 with Lanakila Manuel's protest at the site, among others. So I've long had an interest in sacred land issues here in Hawaii and elsewhere. So when I was here in the summer of 2015 on Maui, where I was conducting burial protection research, I learned that construction vehicles may be going up the mountain. So I came over. And I was on the ground for the events. I was actually in the Kapu Aloha 101 video, and was there. It was very powerful to see all of that. To answer your question succinctly, the expression of ongoing tradition in that specific place is unambiguous to me.
Are you familiar with an ahu called Koko?
I am familiar with ahu Koko. Altar of the blood rain, yes. I'm stumbling on it because it's hard to talk about. I was there. I was at Ahu Ka'ua Koko. Yeah, I've got it written down for you. But Ka'ua Koko. This Ahu resided roughly at the 11,000 foot level on Mauna Kea. It was constructed and consecrated on the days of the protests during the summer of June 2015. On the 25th of June, the road had been closed. Practitioners were allowed by rangers and others to go up the mountain to minister to Ahu, to check on their sites and so forth. I am humbled and lucky to be able to say that my son and I accompanied others, various Hawaiian practitioners, Pono Kuakai, who's here today. I want to acknowledge him and Jojo Henderson and Mikey Rajadat, who was Kiai of longstanding. They were on the mountain as well. And so at that, what was important to me that day on the 25th was to witness what happened at Ka'ua Koko. And it was this. The group got together and they said, we stand in Kapu Aloha, just as you saw in the video. They also said, not everybody stood in Kapu Aloha yesterday. It got tense and hard, and how do we deal with that? How do we deal with some of the dissension in the community and the tensions? And to my mind, as an outsider, again, I'm humbled, I have to say I'm an outsider here, what I witnessed was a version of ho'oponopono, or making right, of people talking through their differences and saying, hey, we've got work to do as a community. We're committed now. We have to get past our differences. And they offered up mele and oli to Ka'ua Koko. It became, in that short amount of time, one of the nexus points on the mountain for religious expression.
And what was that?
This is June 25th.
But what was that religious expression?
Focus point of ho'okupu, offering, of prayers, of ho'oponopono, all these traditional religious actions by community, in solidarity, in ritual. So I witnessed all that. A few months later, I believe it was September 13th, 2015, reportedly by an Office of Mauna Kea Management employee, the Ahu was removed, bulldozed presumably off the shoulder of the road. And Jojo Henderson and Pueo spoke profoundly to that moment in a video captured in Na'au News Now on Facebook. And I can show it as an exhibit. It's T-1-G. that hasn't been uploaded yet. I have it written out as an exhibit. It's a minute long.
Any objection, Mr. Ching, to allowing this as part of the answer to your...
I was just going to ask leave for its showing.
I'm sorry?
I was just going to ask you if we could have leave to show it at this point.
Well, I'm asking you if that's okay.
It's great.
Okay, let's do that. And again, it won't be recorded by our court reporter, but it will be uploaded by Mr. Freitas, I think. Okay.
Understand.
Very good.
Oh. Is it got closed? Go to history. Yeah. It'll be a Facebook link that says Now News Now. But open a new window first. Oh, well. Okay.
That's not it, right?
That's not it. Just the very first Facebook link that appears should be it. And then, that's not it. Now you have to, we can refresh it during the, at some point. Okay, I can find it very quickly.
Why don't we take a 10-minute break and you can set everything up. Right? Thank you.
You're watching Naleo TV.
Contested case hearing for the 30-meter telescope project. A proceeding for the state of Hawaii, DLNR, Board of Land and Natural Resources.
You're watching Naleo TV.
Contested case hearing for the 30-meter telescope project, a proceeding for the State of Hawaii, DLNR, Board of Land and Natural Resources.
What are you going to, yeah, right. What's that, Professor? All right. Okay, let's resume, please. I think we're going to commence with the video showing in answer to Mr. Ching's question.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
You can tell me when to begin.
Now.
Aloha, guys. Here's some breaking news, some sad news for you guys this morning. If you don't recognize where we're standing right now, it's probably because the ahu that was constructed here by Kanaka Maoli back in June, that have already had countless ceremonies performed and offerings, has been removed. We've been informed by the rangers that Office of Mauna Kea Management is in charge of this type of activity, of the removal of structures located in this area. The Ahu Koho Koko once stood here, and it represented the resurgence and the rebirth and the strengthening of our people and our culture and our religion and our spirituality and our sovereignty. And it was totally compliant with the fake states laws. It was off to the side of the road, and it wasn't bothering anybody. It posed no public safety risk. Yeah, as you can see, it's been removed.
I usually come up here every second Sunday and usually clean the ahu. No, we can't even pray. Everybody else can pray in this world, but we can't pray as Kanaka. That's not right, bro. This is wrong, and whoever did this is going to answer for this.
Thank you. Mr. Ching?
Do you know if the OMKM rules having to do with ahu and their removals, were they followed? Or were there any rules in place?
I do not know. I've heard discussions, but I don't know.
Okay, so then you probably would not know if this situation has ever been settled or, you know, terminated legally or whatever.
Well, what I do know is that by way of Hawaii statutes, I would regard this as an example of desecration, because this creates clear injury and offense to a religious practitioner through destruction of religious place and object. And this is 1107. I've got it in my notes. I can find it here. But I have read that statute. I'm familiar with it. And the only reason
I believe it's in your written testimony. Is that correct?
That is not in my written testimony. It was in my... it is not in my written testimony.
Okay. It doesn't really matter because it has been talked about, and it is an exhibit that's
yes
in the lineup of exhibits. So thank you. I have no further questions, John.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Ching. Mr. Kaiama for Kahea.
Aloha, Professor Johnson. It's a pleasure meeting you.
Likewise.
How would you respond to those who might say that these events, these recent events, are in fact recent events solely designed in an attempt to stop the TMT project? How would you respond to that?
I would respond by saying that would be based on an impoverished notion of religion. That religion, through time, across cultures, has been most animate, most engaged, most expressive in moments of crisis. The crucifixion of Jesus, to choose an example that's well known, cannot be explained apart from political history and crisis. So much of the world's religions are expressed in moments of crisis. Theological richness is a function of crisis. People have a problem they need to solve. They look to the cosmos, to elsewhere, to deal with the biggest, most trying questions that could possibly be brought upon them. Hawaiians do this through prayer, through dance, through song, through the construction and consecration of ahu, and then the care of them. Malama and Kuleana, to care for those sites. So I would say this stands, the kinds of action you're referring to, not only stand in continuity with long-standing Hawaiian traditions, but are recognizable to historians of religion as being very fundamental to religions in all contexts.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. And so, though contemporary, it is your opinion, based on your education, your research, and your personal experiences on the Mauna, that this is in fact a religious and spiritual practice.
No question.
Okay. And that these practices, because should be now taken into account in the permitting process in this case.
As a historian of religion, I recognize these as unambiguous religious practices or spiritual practices, beliefs expressed, so forth. And on my reading of relevant state law and rules, absolutely.
Thank you. Good. It's a good segue. You understand that one of the criteria for this contested case hearing is Article 12, Section 7 of the Hawaii State Constitution. Yes?
Yes.
Which essentially reads, the state reaffirms and shall protect all rights customarily and traditionally exercised for subsistence, cultural, and religious purposes. It uses the word religious but not spiritual. Mm-hmm. Can you explain, or do you have an opinion about that?
Thank you for asking. That's a good question. It's one my students like to ask, colleagues. We debate about this. For the purposes of this kind of setting, just kind of an everyday understanding of the intersection of cultural practices and law, I would take them to be synonymous. That is, what one person might call spiritual, I might write about as religious. It's the category that comes out of academic work, often is found in legal contexts, but I regard spirituality as religious and vice versa. Sometimes religion, some would say, has a more institutional character, whereas spiritual beliefs and practices may have a more a less institutional character, but I would regard them as functionally equivalent.
Okay. You stated in your testimony, that there's no question as to the sacred character of Mauna Kea.
Yes.
Did you mean the whole Mauna Kea is sacred, or did you mean only the recognized ahu?
Thank you for asking that question. First of all, I would qualify that, as I do in my statement, both written and oral, to many in the Native Hawaiian community. I don't mean to suggest others might have different opinions. That's been amply clear in this process. I would say to many in the Native Hawaiian community now and in the past, Mauna Kea is regarded as sacred. To the second part of your question, my testimony, as I intended it, is meant to speak to both the mountain people's sensibilities towards the mountain as a whole, and it's the ideal of it as being non-defiled or undefiled. Aspects of my testimony pertain specifically to the Ahu on the proposed TMT site, but those are not mutually exclusive testimonies insofar as one recognizes the other.
Okay. Let me clarify something. On your direct testimony, on page 3, I think you talk about experiences on Mauna Kea. You wrote, I witnessed many religious activities, including singing, praying, chanting, and the making of offerings at various ahu, or the altars. Do you include Kapu Aloha among the religious activities?
In my opening statement today, I foregrounded that, and I introduced that exhibit, the video Kapu Aloha 101, because the answer is a resounding yes. I think it's the substratum upon which these other religious expressions in the present are really taking hold.
Okay. I'm not sure, I wasn't sure if Kealoha asked you, but can you tell us about your previous work on Hawaii Island?
Thank you for asking. Most of my work in the state of Hawaii has been on the island of Maui, but I have worked here. I wrote a book that largely focuses on the Kauai dispute, so-called Forbes Cave dispute, and I spent considerable time here, but also speaking with people from here about that issue. And we don't need to revisit that unless there are follow-up questions. More recently, I participated in a project at Miloli'i that I think has direct relevance to what's happened on Mauna Kea. And this was the construction of a memorial shrine for fishermen who perished in a boat accident off of Miloli'i some decades ago. Walter Paulo of that community approached Edward Halealoha Ea about properly memorializing the dead in that place to give the ancestors a sense of closure, to give the current community a sense of historical memory, and to embody that through pohaku, stones. It's a stone memorial. So I had gone down there with Halealoha Ea to collect names from people, because what became clear in building this memorial was it wasn't just about the fishermen, but that lots of people since then had passed without being properly memorialized in the community, and that in a Hawaiian way, the memory was being lost of the iwi kupuna, and that was a profound injury. And to rectify that injury, this memorial took place in stone. So now there are pohaku in that place that call out for those names in a Hawaiian way. And I understand the ahu on Mauna Kea to perform a similar function, that is of making sure that memory of these events and of this sanctity from the perspective of the practitioners is retained into the future.
Okay. And forgive me, I might have missed it, but the events on Miloli'i.
Yeah.
Did you say that was in participation in a public proceeding? I don't know.
Yeah, it was open to the public, yeah.
Okay, okay. All right. Did that include also consultation or meetings with public officials?
Up to that point it did. I was not involved in those meetings.
Okay.
And one last small piece, I helped prepare a kapa for reinterments from some British museums by Hui Malama for their last act of repatriation before they closed their nonprofit.
Okay. Well, thank you, Professor Johnson. I think I've concluded mine. Just to let you know, I fondly call Makanane Atwood the rip current because he kind of drags you along.
Yeah, I have to say, I go to bed early normally, and he was talking like Maka can do, and then I hear the roosters. I realize, oh wow, it's now morning. Yeah.
Excuse me, I'm sorry about that. Yes, so that's how I finally know Atwood Makanane, but just a few more questions. Yeah. Did you meet Mr. Freitas on June 24, 2015, or was it sometime later?
I did not meet him. I saw him. As I said, I was there 24th, 25th, and he was very visible and present, as you could tell from the Kapu Aloha 101 video. But I did not meet him on those days. It was on the anniversary this year, June 24th, that I went back up to Mauna Kea. I had been told by some of the Kiai, Jojo Henderson and Lakea Trask, that there would be ceremony. So I went up, and I was invited, along with Lori Halemano and some others, and Lakea, to go up the Mauna to witness them caring for various religious sites. And where we arrived were the ahu that I describe at the proposed TMT site. And there is when I met Mr. Freitas. But before I met him personally, I witnessed him conduct protocol. He was clearly the protocol leader that day, and I've come to learn would be in other contexts, offered simple prayer, and then ho'okupu, offerings to the ahu, led the group in just to kind of the clearing of thoughts and so forth. And then after the ceremony closed, he introduced himself to me. We talked story, and that's how I met him.
Okay. And just to be clear, just for the record, when you say June 24th this year, you meant 2016.
Thank you for asking. This past year, 2016. Yeah.
Right. Okay. And prior to your meeting Mr. Freitas, did he have any knowledge, or do you know if he was aware of who you were?
I would be very surprised.
Okay. Thank you. And then how did Mr. Freitas acknowledge you when you first met him on that first year anniversary?
He actually sought me out. I was there with friends, people I had met, Lakea and others, but I didn't presume to step forward in the ceremony. And he said, "Hey, you, come on, step up," and just included me, and then opened up a conversation.
And thank you for stepping up.
Mahalo.
Yeah. Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kaiama. Mr. Fergerstrom?
Good morning, Professor Johnson.
Good morning.
I'm Harley Ferguson. I've read your testimony, your written direct testimony, and it has quite a long source of studies that you've done regarding religion and law. I find that very interesting that you crossed the two over. If I'm not mistaken, in your testimony, you stated that that you thought the EIS perhaps should be redone to include the existence of the new ahu that are on the TMT sites. Is that correct?
Correct.
So, with your familiarity with law and Hawaiian things, you're familiar with Public Law 103-150, which is the apology bill?
I have read it.
Okay. In there is a statement that says the health and well-being of the Native Hawaiian people are intrinsically tied to the feelings and attachment to the land. Do you agree with that statement?
Yeah. Could you say it again, please?
Yes, it says the health and well-being of the Hawaiian people, Native Hawaiian people, is intrinsically tied to the feelings and attachment to the land. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. I would more than agree. I would say that's really the essence of so much that aina, in a Hawaiian way, the land, is when the ancestors, the iwi kupuna, are buried, they're kanu, they're planted, right? And so too was haloa planted, the taro. And so much of Hawaiian religion can be encapsulated if one understands that relationship between the ancestors, the aina, and the product of the aina, and those who are nurtured by it. That would be Hawaiian religion, as I understand it.
Thank you. So when you had the opportunity, you had spoke earlier about having the opportunity to work with Kekuni Blaisdell.
Yes.
Could you speak a little bit more about that? Were you around during the times of the tribunals, for instance?
Yes. This was just after, I believe it was 1996, possibly 97 when we met. The tribunal, if I'm not mistaken, was 93.
Yes.
So he was still very much in that context. And the first thing when we met, he gave me videotape. He said, "Hey, watch them." And then he invited me. He said, "Come to my house." And I said, "When?" He said, "Thursday." I said, "Well, you didn't even know when I'm going to be there. How you know Thursday?" He says, "Halavai, every Thursday." And this, many people know, this was the night of the week when community practitioners, academics, religious practitioners would gather with him to talk story and teach each other, learn about things Hawaiian. And so he taught me quite a bit about that moment. But when he came to learn of my interest in religion in particular, this is when he really instructed me in Hawaiian notions of care for oneself, the piko, apo, na'au, and the ma'i, and how that then ramifies outwards to care for others, care for the land, and openings, piko, to different aspects of the world, nature, and how then those piko are also on the landscape, and that there are certain places of particular power, different for different families and so forth, that need to be cared for precisely because they're openings to the universe. He, in those discussions, did not reference Mauna Kea because we didn't get into the geography of specific places, but I would take what he told me in that setting. That helps me understand what I see when people like William Freitas care for a spot. I say, oh, to him, this is a piko, that he has a kuleana to Malama, no question.
You also stated that historically, it's through, I guess you could call tragic events that happen in society that bring forth the depth of understanding that people still have to their religions.
Yes.
And would you say that these demonstrations that have gone on upon Mauna Kea are really very much describes exactly what you're talking about there?
Yes, I am.
Professor, I'm going to remind you that I've asked you earlier to answer the questions without
elaboration,
going too far afield.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Yes, I'm a professor of religion, not of political science. So I study religion. And this is what I see when I study on Mauna Kea. These events are to me clearly religious, the protest and subsequent care for the mountain.
So you're familiar with, I'm sure just being in Hawaii, you've seen the attachment people have to the land, wherever that land is.
Yeah.
And the attachment to even like the ocean and how we treat that as well. Would you think, or would you, you described how attached the Hawaiian is to his land and stuff like that. That would be synonymous with the word intrinsic. Is that right? With what word? Intrinsic. Intrinsic. There you go. Thank you. Thank you for that correction.
I would understand that for many Hawaiians, their connection to the Aina and also to iwi kupuna in the Aina is how you're describing it, intrinsic.
Thank you for that correction of words, too. Yeah. Thank you very much for your participation. Thank you very much for coming this far away to come and testify in this hearing. Yeah. Mahalo.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Ferguson. Ms. Kihoi?
Aloha, Mr. Johnson.
Aloha.
Mahalo for being here today.
Welcome.
For joining us, crossing an ocean to be here to testify in support of the protection of our Mauna. Do you believe that a person's spiritual connection to Mauna Kea should be measured by how long that person has been physically familiar with this area?
No.
Do you believe that a spiritual connection to Mauna Kea can be felt even if one has never physically visited the mountain?
As a scholar of religion, I have heard such claims and I recognize them to be meaningfully religious.
Is it your belief that a person who has a spiritual connection to Mauna Kea, who has never physically visited the mountain, can still feel injury and emotional trauma if the mountain is harmed?
Here, a very brief analogy is important, it seems to me. If the answer is no, then we cannot make sense of much of how Muslims regard their sacred places, how Christians regard their sacred places, and so forth. Few in those contexts have had the privilege to go back to those homelands. And yet they would regard that as an immense injury should the Temple of the Mount or other places be desecrated.
Do you believe that just because one may be able to conduct certain cultural practices amongst the present observatories on Mauna Kea, that one more will not have a significant impact?
I have heard testimony that I regard as religious that persuades me that for a number of practitioners it would be a further injury.
As someone who refers to himself as an outsider to our culture, do you believe that Mauna Kea is sacred?
As a historian of religion, it's my opinion that it is sacred to many Native Hawaiians. Your question, if I understood correctly, was about me personally?
Yes.
I don't feel like that's the capacity in which I'm here, but I would simply add, because it may be asked of me later, that I'm a mountain person and I have a high regard for mountains. And in the language that I've heard, it might be approximating something like a sacred regard for mountains, yes.
Thank you. With your background in religious studies, would you consider Mauna Kea to be a church to Native Hawaiians?
That's a very good question. It's the kind of question that state and federal courts have grappled with for decades when trying to assess indigenous religions and their understanding of place. And many indigenous peoples have had to use analogies like that in order to get frequently Christian judiciaries to understand their points. So I would say insofar as that analogy does that work, it makes sense to me. But I would also add that from a Native Hawaiian perspective, as I understand it, that the practices that rituals happen in lots of places and that the church, well, Mauna Kea is one big church, I'll just say that. Yeah.
Would you say that Mauna Kea as a church to Native Hawaiians may have a similar significance as the Vatican may have to Roman Catholics?
That is an apt analogy.
And you stated earlier that you are familiar with the close and personal relationship that Native Hawaiians have to the land. Is that correct?
Yes.
And when an indigenous people, such as Native Hawaiians in this case, have access and the open ability to place their prayers on this land that they consider to be their church, what are the benefits to their identity and well-being?
That they can freely practice their religion.
And when an indigenous people, such as Native Hawaiians in this case, are restricted and criminalized for placing their prayers on this land that they consider to be their church, what are the impacts to their identity and well-being?
I can't speak to every impact, but I would say generally I recognize that as an injury and a violation of religious freedom.
So is it your testimony that you believe that if the TMT project should proceed and be constructed, that Native Hawaiians and non-Native Hawaiians will be injured?
It is my understanding, I have heard a number of non-Native Hawaiians express religious reverence for Mauna Kea. So clearly to members of the Native Hawaiian community there would be injury. And it also seems to me to be the case that some members of non-Hawaiian communities would also be injured.
Thank you. Would you consider this injury to be irreparable?
The history of religions is an unfinished story. And if there's anything I've learned as a scholar of religion, it's that I don't have the powers of prophecy. But it would seem, in a more serious way, it would seem to be such a profound injury that I would regard it as severe and traumatizing for those, to those for whom Mauna Kea is central.
Do you believe that if the TMT project should proceed and be constructed, and Native Hawaiians and non-Native Hawaiians injured irreparably, that this injury will be felt and passed down through generations?
Yes. This is very clear in indigenous communities that land-based religions that face harm, that those injuries ramify through generations in very clear and measurable ways.
Are you aware that the TMT project has international partners funding this project?
Yes.
Are you able to name those countries?
Some, if they have not changed. I believe the governments of Canada, India, and Japan are involved. I don't know if there are others.
Are you aware that during the first months of our physical stand 24/7 visual in the Haleʻipohaku area of Mauna Kea, that we came into contact with visitors from Canada, China, India, and Japan, who specifically came to Mauna Kea to place prayers and ask for forgiveness because they did not believe or support what their home countries were doing to our native Hawaiian people and our sacred mountain, Mauna Kea.
I am aware of the Canadian visitors you speak of, and upon my first visit to Mauna Kea, one of the first things I saw was a Facebook sign in Japanese to other Japanese people about the sacred status of Mauna Kea. So on those, yes. The others, I was not aware.
And why do you believe that they would feel so compelled to make the time, to take the time out of their vacation to come to Mauna Kea and place those prayers of forgiveness for their people?
Yeah. As a scholar of religion, it seems to me that on its best days, religion brings out empathy. And even when one is not a native Hawaiian religious practitioner, one can empathize with what it might mean to have such a site desecrated. So I believe that trigger of empathy has been set off because people think about their own traditions and what a comparable injury would feel like. And so that's how I understand those moments.
Do you believe that if the TMT project should proceed and be constructed, that the native people of the international partners who are contributing to this project will also be injured?
Yes, and I could give you a brief example. Absolutely, I've heard of First Nations people from Canada who have said things in just that way to me. So yes. In December, I was in India, in a state called Nagaland, visiting the indigenous peoples there. And they're very aware of the United Nations declarations on the rights of indigenous peoples. And they have followed Standing Rock events very closely, and they talk about the injuries there. And when I described that there's similar movement of protectors at Mauna Kea, and they asked about, well, what's happening? And they said, wow, that would be really hurtful. That those words were the first off their tongues.
There's an exhibit, T1B. I think I also have it in my exhibits also, but I'm just going to refer to it as T1B.
That's not a video.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Yes, I have T1B.
Okay.
Oh, we can do it here, yeah. This one.
The little one right behind the big one.
Oh, sorry, thank you. It's a dark image, I'm afraid. Here. Mic clear.
I think it's still maybe warming up a little bit. If you can rotate it to the, yeah.
Is there a focus mechanism?
Focus on it, thank you.
Oh, you got it, okay.
This photo that was taken on June 24th, 2015, of a kupuna who was severely traumatized by what he had witnessed that day. Are you aware that this kupuna was willing to sacrifice himself that day and wished to take the place of the mountain? And he was willing to give his own life that day instead of the mountains and instead of all of ours. Are you aware of that?
I was there. I heard him say that. That's Mr. Dudois. And he's being comforted by, near as I can tell, William Freitas and the pictures a little bit, Earl de Leon. And I was within earshot for some of the conversation, and the parts I picked up were of that language of martyrdom, is what I would call that as a historian, a willingness to take the sacrifice, yes. I did hear and see that. So in the language of a historian of religion, he was willing to substitute the mountain's injury for his, and we call that sacrifice, is the language of theology at least.
I don't think I have any more questions. It's really hard for me to look at that photo.
Yeah.
Mahalo. But thank you so much, Mr. Johnson.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Mr. Chu?
Good morning, Your Honor. Good morning, Professor Johnson.
Good morning.
Thank you for your testimony.
You're welcome.
I have no questions.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chu. Mr. Vicente?
Dwight Vicente. Morning.
Good morning.
Do you know who was president of the United States back in 1820?
1820. Half of my high school son will be dismayed. No.
Was it President Monroe?
I do not know. 1820, that's getting near the Jackson years, but okay, no, I don't know.
On September 19, 1820, Mr. John C. Jones was appointed to reside at the Sandwich Islands in the capacity of agent of the United States for commerce and seamanship. Was Mr. Jones in charge of the mission? Do you know if Mr. Jones was in charge of the missionary families back in 1820?
The timing is right. His specific name I do not know.
So is it fair to say that it was a conspiracy under President Monroe to colonize the Sandwich Island Kingdom at that time?
I don't know those historical facts adequately from the U.S. nation-state side. I know what was happening in Hawaii at that time with the end of the Kapu just before, and the arrival of missionaries at Oiwi and so forth, but I do not know it in the United States what was happening.
Do you know the history that the missionary families always played a role in politics in the Sandwich Island Kingdom as well as the Hawaiian Kingdom after 1840?
That is a fair statement.
Do you understand the Reciprocity Treaty of 1875 signed between the Hawaiian Kingdom and the United States, the 13 United States?
I do not.
Are you, this is one of my favorite questions. Are you familiar with the Northwest Ordinance of 1787?
Neither was your son. I remember. No. No.
Are you aware that a lot of the history behind the Sandwich Island Kingdom, the Hawaiian Kingdom, to the present day is based on the Northwest Ordinance of 1787?
The last part of your question, I'm not able to speak to.
I guess I have no more questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vicente. Mrs. Freitas?
Aloha, Cindy Freitas, aloha.
Aloha.
Other than this case today, have you testified in any other legal matters involving religious and procedural issues?
Yes, I have. Well, I've offered testimony, written testimony, in a case for Hui Malama, and this had to do with the Wellcome Trust in Great Britain, and it had to do with the repatriation of numerous iwi kupuna, in particular po'o, skull. And I was asked to provide written testimony as to the meaning of iwi kupuna for Hawaiians today. And beyond that, I have offered comment in federal Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act meetings, including regarding the status of the Bishop Museum as or not as a Native Hawaiian organization. I testified against that position. And I've offered public comment in the same setting for another context. Yes.
Did you attend the DLNR Emergency Rule public comment meeting?
I did. I attended that meeting on Oahu, and I gave a public comment. As I noted, I was on the mountain on June 24th, 2015. I was with my son at the first major bend in the gravel road, which is where the DLNR officers stopped that day, as was represented in the Kapu Aloha 101 film. This is just after rain had begun to fall, and the DLNR officers were accelerating the rate of movement up the mountain, and also there was an increasing rate of arrests taking place, again, all captured in that video, exhibit T1.D. And I was moving up the Mauna more or less in pace with the DLNR officers just ahead of them. I was with my son, for sure didn't want him to get arrested. And at that first bend, this is where the pahaku moved into the road, okay? And I witnessed aspects of this. And on that basis, and on the basis of the ways in which that did or did not adhere to Kapu Aloha, but also the ways in which the state overstepped its authority, in my view, to create a set of restrictions that would prevent practitioners, among others, from being on the mountain for stated public safety risks. Like I mentioned before, I'm a mountain person. I understand the risk of a rock in a road, and I also understand empirically when a rock has been removed from a road, the rocks had been removed from the road, so the stated risk to people for travel seemed to me to be an excuse of the state to prevent practitioners to be on the Mauna, and I testified to that effect at the DLNR emergency rule meeting.
Exhibit T-1.E is a video about religious activities on Mauna Kea, including the construction of one of the ahus on the proposed TMT sites. Could you tell us what this video is about and why is it important with reference to the CDUA?
Excuse me, are you intending to ask questions after this?
Yes.
Well, is the video going to speak for itself or not? If not, then I'm going to ask you to just ask the question and not watch the video.
Well, we want to watch the video then.
Okay. You can ask a follow-up, but I don't expect to see the video and continued dialogue.
The video is quite brief, I think, this one.
It isn't a matter of brief. It's a matter of not being, duplicative.
Got it.
Okay.
Correct.
And again, this is exhibit which? T1?
T-1.E.
Okay, good. Okay.
This exhibit, T-1-E, building the ahu, is it a form of religious, customary, traditional, spiritual practices within the Hawaiian people?
Yes.
And also building the kukiai hale, also a religious, spiritual, cultural practice for the people of Hawaii, for the Hawaiian people.
Yes, and I would add there that in both cases, I recognize it through the presence of the objects, that they've both been built through consecration, through dedication in ways that stand in continuous tradition to the past, including back to places like Pu'ukohala and so forth. But in the latter case, the hale, I also recognize it through a moment of desecration. I happened to be at the hale this summer when, I hate to say this on the record, but it's important to understand sincerity of emotions. When it became known that someone had defecated in the hale, okay, and some of the young kiai were there, and to witness the level of injury they experienced around that event really hit me that it's a drag to clean that up, no question, but that didn't explain their emotions. It was a deeper injury. That was clear to me.
Also in this video, I noticed they're using malos and kiheis. Is that also a traditional, customary, spiritual, religious practices that they are living it today?
Yes, I would refer to Tai Kavika Tengen's book on Native Men Remade and the practice of the hale mua and the nakoa on Maui, but here also Hawaii. And that, as he argues in that book, the tradition's really strong right now and coming back. But one of the primary acts for men, for the kane, is to humble themselves to wear the malo in public. And when they choose to do that, they're being Hawaiian in the deepest sense.
Did you witness any of the Haleakala telescope protests as well? And if you did, can you describe them?
I did. In fact, I was on Maui the summer of 2015, and I was at the base yard when the trucks came out, and there were numerous arrests. And some of the same kiai from Mauna Kea were there, Kalakoa, Ke'eo, Kai Prace, among others, and witnessed similar kinds of religious sensibilities and a kind of malama for the mountain that assured me that Mauna Kea, the protests there, were not isolated. The sensibility was not anomalous, that it was a widespread religious sensibility that had been triggered.
Okay. You mentioned Ava earlier. Do you know what the significance of Ava is in the culture, customary, traditional practice for the Native Hawaiian people?
It's not an area of expertise of mine, but I do understand it's a ritual drink often that precedes ceremony.
Okay. Are you familiarized with the ahu? Oh wait, the ahu o ka'o koko.
Yep.
The desecration of that ahu. Are you aware of any kia'is making a report on that?
I did hear that a report was made, but I did not independently verify that.
Okay. That report was made on September 14, 2015, which is case number HA-16-204. At this point, that file is in a file called miscellaneous, public, ahu, structure remove. At this point, nothing has been done. Would that cause injury to a lot of the kia'is who are trying to find answers to what happened to ahu o ka'okoko in regards with the state who's in charge, which is DLNR? Would that cause injury waiting so long for answers?
It seems to me that the state statute on desecration should addresses this directly in if only Ka'okoko were recognized as a religious site. I believe that's the problem here. It's not being regarded in that light. As a historian of religion...
Excuse me, Professor,
yes.
That wasn't the question.
Okay. Yes.
I think the question was the failure to follow up on the complaint.
Yeah, thank you.
Has that caused injury?
Thank you for that. That seems like a reasonable conclusion to me.
Mihana had mentioned Hawaiian churches as well as Mauna Kea being Hawaiian churches. Would you agree with me that there's many Hawaiian churches on every moku, especially in the A'apua'a, with no structures for the Native Hawaiian people in many different areas? Would you agree agree to that?
My understanding is there are many sacred places that might be analogously understood to be churches throughout the islands, yes.
Okay. And these churches is just land formation.
Right.
Wouldn't you agree with the Native Hawaiian people, they did not desecrate the area that they would puli on, give makana to? They would not desecrate the land just for a church. Would you agree that there's no desecration within our religious practices, that we will build a structure like a house or like a regular church style that we see today?
Yes, a significant exception would be in moments of warfare. There would be acts of religious violence. I think history shows that. But overall, and certainly in the modern period, the solidarity of Hawaiians has risen, is expressed at a level where I would say, no, I do not know of any modern instances of that kind of desecration.
As the Kanaka Maoli grew, as well as the government, would you say that our religious customary culture practices are being, is kind of, with the point of view of the government, is kind of not, they don't want to recognize it in areas such as Mauna Kea, especially as time goes along, especially in today, because we still practice up there. They kind of like push it on the side. That's, you know, like how you said in the CDUA, they're not looking at what's happening today.
Excuse me,
Yeah.
Professor.
I
Are you
think I
asking
got
him
that
to?
a question.
Are you asking him to speak for the government, or why
No,
the government
because-
is or is not doing something? That's what I
Wait,
heard
let
your
me,
question.
Let me strike that. I think I did it wrong. Hold on. The apprehension among the Kanaka Maoli grew as government, in their eagerness to halt this resource decline, began to create more and more conservation districts, particularly in the nearshore ocean areas, inadvertently and effectively taking away substance, fishing and gathering areas upon the Hawaiian Islands, especially also in the mountain. Would you agree on that?
May I ask you where you're reading from?
I have a document, but I didn't put it in exhibit, but I wanted this phrase.
Well, what is it, though? We need to know what that is.
Ku'ulu Ahu Moko Advisory Committee Strategic Plan.
So that came out of their strategic plan?
Yes.
Okay, so your question is, assuming that that's accurately read, does the witness agree with that?
Yes, that's all I want to know. In your opinion, do you agree because of apprehension among the Kanaka Maoli grew as government in the eagerness to halt this resource decline began to create more and more conservation districts, particularly in the near shorelines, ocean areas, inadvertently and effectively taking away substance fishing and gatherings areas upon the islands as well as the mountain, in your opinion?
I don't know the history of the development of those policies adequately to speak to that.
Okay. What do you think about Native Hawaiians having to get a permit to build a ahu?
On the one hand, that it strikes me as a scholar of religion as offensive and a limitation that many people don't face. However, I would hasten to add that in any democratic system, there's going to be competition over rights and so forth, and that there are mechanisms, even within Hawaii state law, that enable reasonable recognition of religious freedoms if administrative procedures are adequately followed.
Okay. What would be more effective of that on Native Hawaiian practitioners?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
What would be the effective of that of a Native Hawaiian practitioners?
Yeah.
Just a minute.
Yeah. What would be the effects
okay.
of that of a Native Hawaiian practitioner?
Just a minute, please.
Okay.
Mr. Kaiama.
Again, I think that's vague and ambiguous. Mrs. Freitas, are you referring to the requirement of a permit? Is that what you're requiring for the building of an ahu?
Mr. Kaiama, you'll need to direct the objection to me.
Oh.
I then get to ask the questioner ask questions.
It did seem vague and ambiguous to me, so I wanted to know. Yes, I'll leave that.
Thank you. Mrs. Freitas?
Yes, it directs the ahu. Would it have an effect?
Could you clarify your question and ask it again, please?
What would be the effect of the Native Hawaiian practitioner about that ahu permit?
So if I can restate what I think you're asking, because I want to be sure I understand the question in that context, rather the answer in that context. I think you're asking what is the effect of requiring a permit to build an ahu on the Native Hawaiian practitioner?
No, it's the opposite. What would be the effect of that of a Native Hawaiian practitioner to have a permit to build an ahu? What would be the effect if there was to have a permit to build an ahu? That we have to get a permit to build a ahu.
So what is the effect if you get the permit?
What would be the effect if we have to get a permit as a Native Hawaiian practitioner to build an ahu?
All right, that question is understood. Professor, do you understand it?
I believe I do.
Please answer.
Yes. On the positive side, a permitting system enables ongoing protection. Okay. On the other hand, it's the case in the history of all religious traditions that there are moments of deep crisis, emergency, and so forth. They're more common than not, where administrative procedure ought to have the flexibility to understand that, well, someone cannot go get a permit in the middle of the night if an action is called for, or the administrative body may not have contemplated the need, may not even have procedure here. So there are profound costs to that vision as well.
Okay. Can you address the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People in relation to this contested case?
Yes, briefly, it's an international mechanism, and it was signed off by many countries in 2007. It was many years in the development. Finally signed off by the United States government in 2010. It articulates a number of provisions for the protection of indigenous peoples, and particularly their traditional practices, places, sovereignty, so forth. It's a very high standard. It sets an ideal, and the signatory countries, again including the United States, then are assenting at the level of ideals, at least, that these are aspirations to which they seek to bring their own procedures and policies into alignment with. And so sacred places, protection of human remains, subsistence resources, including purity of water, these are all clearly stipulated as important needs for indigenous communities that should be protected, and if they aren't, that there will be harm to those communities. This is not a hard law in the sense that there's no adjudicative body to address violations. It's left to the goodwill of the jurisdictions of nations, their states and counties, to honor those ideals.
Okay. Yes. Thank you. I have no more questions.
Thank you, Mrs. Freitas. Mr. Manat?
Good morning, Professor Johnson. My name is Pete Manat. I represent the University of Hawaii.
Good morning.
Wanted to get a little further background on your experiences. Have you lived on the mainland your entire life?
With some short exceptions, yes.
Okay. Have you ever lived in Hawaii for any length of time?
I spend the majority of most summers here in recent times.
And when you say recent, how recent?
Well, over the last 15 years, at least a month, often two, here in Hawaii.
Okay. So you are a religious studies professor at the University of Colorado, is that correct?
That's my primary appointment, yes.
Okay. You live in Boulder, Colorado?
Outside, yes.
Now, is it correct that in your written direct testimony that you defer to Professor Marie Brown at the University of Hawaii for specifics on the Mauna Kea dispute involving TMT?
In that written direct testimony, I acknowledge her expertise and make that deference. She was listed as a witness, and so out of deference to my colleague and her expertise, she lives here on Hawaii Island. I didn't want to presume to speak, but she has not and did not submit written direct testimony as I understand it. So in my opening statement, I added details to address that.
All right, so let me see if I understand. Are you deferring to Professor Brown on details related to the TMT dispute?
In my written direct testimony, I do. In my opening statement, I do not.
All right. I believe you confirmed that you are not a licensed attorney in any jurisdiction. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. So you are not here giving legal opinions on Hawaii law or practices, correct?
I'm a scholar of religion and law, and I publish in legal venues, and my scholarship is related to the intersection of religion and law, and I do have opinions in that context. In the sense you mean of legal opinion, no.
Right, so you're not giving a legal opinion, correct?
As a member of the public, concerned citizen, I am pointing out the intersection of religion and law that I would hope informs this process.
Are you writing any articles or papers about this dispute?
Yes.
Are you currently writing that article or paper while you are here?
While I am here, no.
So are you in part collecting information from this proceeding itself for the purpose of writing an article or paper?
In general, yes.
And are you writing that article from the perspective of the protesters or those opposed to constructing the TMT project?
No.
What perspective are you addressing in this paper?
As a scholar of religion, and one piece is forthcoming with Brill Press, Handbook of Indigenous Religions, and that's in press. Another piece will be coming out, I hope, in a volume on cultural injury through Cambridge University Press.
Are you taking a position that the TMT project should not be built?
No.
Are you taking a position that if it is built, that it will in fact cause injury?
In those articles, I talk from my understanding of many Hawaiian practitioners that it to them would cause an injury.
Do you ever participate in any pro-development positions when in conflict with religion?
I've certainly considered them. There was a case of a parking lot outside of Boulder, Colorado that I was asked to weigh in on, and I thought long and hard about it and decided I didn't know enough about parking lots to proceed. But I have considered it.
All right, but the majority of your positions have been to support persons asserting religious positions against some form of development or construction. Isn't that right?
That's not a true statement. My primary manuscript book is about conflicts on these issues. And one of my points is to suggest that, as with all tradition, Native peoples, of course, have multiple points of view. And what's interesting to me is how those...
Professor, excuse me, I don't know...
So the answer is no. I'm sorry.
Whatever it was you said in between the question and no, I'm not sure it pertained to the question.
Does my work amount to advocacy for indigenous positions regarding development? And the answer is no.
All right, you are here today, though, on behalf of a party who opposes the TMT project, correct?
That is correct.
Are you aware that there are other cultural practitioners who do, in fact, support the TMT project?
I am.
And in your written direct testimony, however, you have only chosen to take one side of the story. Is that right?
Yeah, I was asked to offer testimony on behalf of William Freitas. After spending time with him, I offered to do that.
So the answer is yes.
Yes.
Right. Mm-hmm. Did you review the entire CDUA for this project?
Yes.
Did you review the entire environmental impact statement?
Yes, with the exception of the geological section, which I attempted to penetrate but failed to.
All right. Do you recall if you read the entire cultural impact assessment study?
I did look at it. Whether I read the whole thing, now that's some months back, I can't speak with certainty on that.
Do you know if you read any of the archaeological inventory surveys done for this project?
I did look at those again months ago. Mm-hmm.
Do you agree that this process that we're in here now going through is part of the consultation or consideration process for the permit?
I do. I worry that it's been framed quite narrowly with regard to the 8 criteria and not other issues, but I admire this process as a form of ongoing consultation, yes.
All right, so anything that you say will in fact be included in the record and considered by the ultimate decision makers, correct?
That is my understanding.
Who contacted you to have you participate in this process today?
William Freitas.
Did anyone else ask you to be a witness?
No.
Did you talk to any of the other either petitioners or other parties to the case?
In what time frame?
At any time.
Oh, yeah.
Did they ask you to be a witness for them? Do you know when the ahu that is currently located on the TMT access road site was installed?
Well, as I understand it, there are three. There's one on the what would be the uphill side. There's one more towards the middle, and then one that predates both of those on the back end, if I understand the description correctly in the EIS. So I don't know which of those you're referring to.
Well, are all three of those located on the northern plateau?
Yes.
And are you aware that two of them were constructed in the middle of the access road down on the northern plateau area that would access the TMT location?
Yes.
Do you know what years those ahu were placed there?
2015.
Do you know who placed them there?
I know some of the people who placed them there.
Was Mr. Freitas one of them?
He was.
Was he the one primarily directing the construction of those ahu?
I can't speak to that. He certainly, by all appearances, played a prominent role.
Do you know if there were any ahu in that same area prior to 2014?
Yes, as described in the EIS, there's one on the back end of the access road, the four-wheel drive road.
All right, but other than that one, on the access road itself, or the area adjacent to the access road, were there any historic or ancient ahu located there?
I have heard discussion of various more minimalist ahu of upright stones. I don't know their specific locations, but I believe they're in that general area.
Would that be what you saw in the archaeological inventory survey or the papers connected with the CDUA?
Could you I simply don't understand.
Is the source of that information from the documents that you reviewed?
Oh, both. I had seen reference to that in the EIS, I believe, and also through other oral testimony in this proceeding.
So it's clear, though, that the location for the TMT site was known before the placement of the three ahu that you just identified, correct?
The two more recent ones in the access road, yes. The third, the EIS speaks only minimally to when it was built. I think it stipulates early 2000s, so I don't know in that case.
Right. Do you know who built that ahu?
I do not know that.
It was not William Freitas, correct?
I can't say that it wasn't.
All right. For the two that Mr. Freitas, that you are aware that Mr. Freitas did participate in constructing, would you agree that the primary purpose for placing there was to assist in stopping or halting the TMT project?
No.
These ahu were placed right in the center of the access road, correct?
Correct.
Do you believe that placing an ahu in the center of a road would, in some manner, create a health or safety concern?
This road is a narrow and bumpy four-wheel drive road. The ahu are quite prominent, and so one would have clear visibility of them upon approach. So no, I do not believe they constitute a threat that way. And one can drive around them, I should add.
Would you agree that persons standing in the middle of the road trying to block vehicle traffic is a health and safety concern?
Balanced with reasons they would be in the road, including a felt sacred duty.
Sir, that's not an answer to the question. Ask the question again.
Yes.
Please answer the question.
Do you agree that persons standing in the middle of the road would pose a health and safety risk?
Your Honor.
Yes, Mr. Kaiama.
I would just say vague and ambiguous, and I guess it lacks foundation, so the question itself.
Overruled. Please answer.
I've never answered a question without context in that sense. That's a big question. Could you provide some context?
Okay. We've seen some videos today of a number of people standing in the middle of the roadway
Yes.
that would go to the summit, correct?
Yes.
Do you believe that persons standing in the middle of a road with the purpose of stopping vehicle traffic to be a health and safety concern?
That would be balanced against other concerns?
Is it a yes? Would that not be a health and safety concern?
Is standing in a road a health and safety concern?
With the purpose of blocking vehicular traffic?
Well, again, I'm trained to answer questions in context. And the context here is of a felt
Professor
sacred
Johnson,
obligation.
this is a process.
Yes.
You need to answer the question.
Okay.
And if there's a context that needs to be put around that, there's an opportunity for redirect examination, and you'll be able to add to your answer at that point.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
So if you
could
could
you ask the
please-
question one more time?
Do you agree that persons standing in the middle of the road for the purpose of stopping vehicular traffic can be a health and safety concern?
In and of itself, yes.
Do you agree that the state has the right to regulate cultural practices?
The state stipulates that it has the right to regulate religious practices.
Do you agree that Mr. Freitas does not have a land title or a deed to the property located on the northern plateau recognized by the state of Hawaii?
If he does, he hasn't told me, but I assume no.
All right, now you compared some of the religious practices associated with this protest to actions that involved the Vatican. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Okay. Are you aware that the Vatican operates telescopes in multiple locations, including its own religious locations?
I'm not aware, actually, of that.
All right, Your Honor, I have no further questions, but I would like to place an objection on the record to the 2 or 3 hours of testimony this morning as essentially being an expansion of the direct testimony through videos and additional questioning, and it essentially violates the rule about direct testimony being presented in written direct form.
Mr. Kaiama? I'm asking you to address that because really you're the only one who, through this process, has the opportunity to object.
And Your Honor, I would have, well, I guess I would oppose or object to Mr. Manat's objection on the grounds that not only is it material relevant, but these are exhibits that have been lodged into the proceedings. So they are clearly part, and they occurred during cross-examination by participants in these proceedings. So I do believe that because they are exhibits and because they're clear, relevant, and material to these proceedings, that they should be allowed.
Well, what about the fact, the objection is that it's beyond the written direct testimony?
Your Honor, I would disagree with that assessment. I think all of those were clearly in line with Mr. Professor Johnson's written direct and his oral testimony.
All right. The objection is noted. I am going to overrule it. But I will expect appropriate objections when appropriate. Please. Mr. Shinyama? Thank you. Mr. Ono?
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Professor. He's representing TMT.
Okay, good morning.
Let me just ask you a couple of questions and follow up to what Mr. Manat had asked you.
Yes.
He had asked you if you had talked to other parties to this proceeding at any time prior to today, and I believe your answer was yes.
Correct.
Did you attempt to coordinate questions and responses with any of these parties?
We talk story about, as people do in an open public process, about the salient issues.
Did you actually try to coordinate the questions from Ms. Pisciotta, for example, so that you would come up with a response and then play the video at a given time?
I understand that is a reasonable thing to do in a process like this. So I
Sir,
did in fact.
the answer is either yes or no, really.
Yes.
Okay. And certainly your wife was involved in this process because she knew exactly when to come up here and put on the video when the question was asked.
Well, it's not as deliberate as it might sound in the sense that do I have exhibits available upon questioning? Yes, she was prepared to play them if need be.
Thank you. Your Honor, I would like to join in Mr. Manat's objection, the University of Hawaii's objections, and I also would add to the objection that this was not a proper cross-examination by the petitioners. This was a coordinated effort, and it was more in the line of a direct examination. On that basis, I would move to strike the cross-examination from the petitioners who had coordinated those efforts.
Thank you. Mr. Kaiama?
If I might, Your Honor, I'm having trouble with the mic.
Yes, of course.
Sorry. Yeah. I'm trying to think what his objection was again. Sorry.
It was twofold. He joined the university in their objections that the witness's testimony, for the most part, was beyond the written direct testimony. And secondly, a new objection, and that is the coordination of this testimony, which amounts to additional direct testimony.
And Your Honor, again, besides being material and relevant to these proceedings and related to his written direct and oral testimony, I say this with respect, but I think that, one, this coordination has been somewhat going on throughout this entire proceedings by both sides.
By both sides?
Yes, I would say both sides.
Really? How is that?
Your Honor, I do know that witnesses have been speaking to counsels, and there have been a level of preparation and a level of coordination among all the parties. I do know, I can say personally, from my experience, we have examined or observed witnesses speaking with counsel during breaks, during cross-examination. So I believe there's been a level of coordination. And if I may now limit it to just perhaps the petitioner's side, I do believe that this has been, in these proceedings, in these, I guess I would say, not as rigid and somewhat less than formal proceedings, that this coordination has been going on throughout the proceedings. So I don't think, Your Honor, that there was anything either untoward or in any way in contravention of what's been going on. I think it's been consistent, and I think for those reasons, and if I might also add, as far as this is Mr. Freitas' witness, and I do know and I do believe that they've had discussions, and I guess I was going to examine that on on redirect examination. That of course there would be some level of preparation.
I think maybe I misunderstood Mr. Ono's objection, but he mentioned specifically Ms. Pisciotta. She was not offering this witness. So, and prior to this day, we have not had confirmation, such as from a witness, that that level of coordination was actually occurring, although it does seem to comport with what the practice has been thus far. But I'm dealing with what is now fact.
And that fact being, Your Honor, I'm sorry.
The answer to the question is yes. Coordination with other cross-examiners. And I don't think the reference was specifically to Ms. Pisciotta, not to Mr. Freitas. It is appropriate to talk to your witnesses during recesses and prior to and post appearance. But the coordination effort, which I hope counsel can see the distinction with other cross-examiners, to enable the expansion of written direct testimony is really not appropriate. And up until today, we did not have the fact to work with. We do now.
And I guess I would have to ask Your Honor, the fact that there might have been some questions prepared, and the fact that there might have been, and I'm not sure, but I'm just saying, a sharing of those questions, I'm not sure that it rises to that level of inappropriate coordination. In fact, I think what happens is that it allows us, or it allows the questioners like Ms. Pisciotta to be more judicially efficient, and not, and I guess would allow me as a presenter, perhaps less of the opportunity to have to object because they're more on point. So I don't believe the fact that, and if there were many written questions that were shared, does not mean that Ms. Pisciotta could not have come up with these questions herself. And Your Honor, I'm not exactly sure how to explain it, but I don't think it rises to that level.
It does, because of the answer given by the witness to the question, the specific question. And so I am suggesting to you that that's one of the reasons we have had some unexplained length of testimony. It is not appropriate, and I fully expected to have objections appropriate all the way across the board, not just for the other side. That's not the way this is supposed to work. Nonetheless, I am going to deny the objection and accept the witness's testimony as is.
Thank you, Your Honor. And for my own, if I may just add, I did think that Mr. Johnson's testimony so far has been fairly efficient. So and pretty much on point. And maybe my perception is not the perception of Your Honor, but I just did think most of the questions seemed very much related to what he had either wrote or orally testified to.
All right, I appreciate that, your comment.
Thank you.
Mr. Ono, anything further?
No, Your Honor. I'll proceed with the examination.
Go ahead.
Professor Johnson, you call yourself an outsider, isn't that right?
Correct.
And you say that in your direct testimony.
Correct.
And in fact, that's one of the ways you describe yourself in one of these chapters, I believe. Oh, I'm sorry, it's in the authenticity paper. Authenticity, invention, articulation, theorizing contemporary Hawaiian traditions from the outside.
Yes.
And that would be consistent with your testimony that you're giving in this proceeding. You're an outsider to Hawaiian culture.
That is correct.
You're not a resident of the state of Hawaii.
I am not a resident of the state of Hawaii.
Have you ever been a resident of the state of Hawaii?
I have not.
Are you an archaeologist?
I am not.
Are you an anthropologist?
By way of method in ways, but my degree, methodologically people would say yes. In terms of my degree and disciplinary home, I am a scholar of religion.
Okay. And one of the things you talk about is that it's in your direct testimony. Tradition is not a thing. It is a process. That's how you describe it.
I did.
And is that an anthropological conclusion, or is that one of religion?
Oh, both. I mean, it's a theoretical conclusion that numerous fields have contributed to.
Earlier, Mr. Manat had asked you whether you were writing a paper or an article about this experience on Mauna Kea, and I believe your testimony was yes, you are.
I am.
Are you receiving any funding for that article or paper that you'll be writing?
Not directly.
When you say not directly, how are you indirectly receiving funding?
I'm involved with research groups that offset some of my research time, which included time on the Mauna that I described before, some aspects of it, but not this trip in particular. I'm paying for this personally.
Who is providing that funding?
Yale University, the government of Norway, University of Colorado.
Was your trip back in June of 2015 funded by these organizations?
In part with the expectation I would produce research results, which I have.
Would you agree that an outsider such as yourself risks socio-political ostracism if he points to a particular Hawaiian cultural practice and labels it as invention, not traditional?
That's not a language I use for the reasons articulated in that article. It's not theoretically helpful language.
Well, if an outsider and an academic came and pointed to the ahu that were constructed after June 24, 2015, and said that those were not authentic, traditional Hawaiian practice of religion, that they were a result of the protests, wouldn't that result in socio-political ostracism?
For the person making that claim.
Right.
Is what you're asking.
Right.
In what context? I'm trying to understand the person making that claim.
Well, wouldn't that person risk being persona non grata amongst Hawaiian study circles?
If you're asking about what risks would I take to represent it as such, I've been very frank and direct in my analysis of Hawaiian issues for decades now. In the Kauai case, I called it like I saw it, which was numerous Hawaiian groups pitted against one another in a fierce struggle that revealed a great deal about tradition. Some of them, in my writing, I describe as more committed than others and so forth. These are, as a scholar of religion, trained by arguably the most foremost the scholar who's looked at politics and religion, these are the kinds of hard claims I'm willing to make as a scholar when I see them.
Okay. But if someone took the opposite view of you, that the ahu were a result of political protest and were not traditional, authentic Hawaiian religious altars, wouldn't that person risk being persona non grata amongst Hawaiian study circles? Let me ask it this way. Isn't that exactly what happened to Jocelyn Linnekin?
That is not exactly what happened to Jocelyn Linnekin.
Jocelyn Linnekin was a professor of anthropology at the University of Hawaii, isn't that right?
That is correct, yeah.
And Professor Linnekin was accused, and maybe falsely accused, of labeling certain Hawaiian practices as being not authentic, but in an invention of tradition. Isn't that right?
She used a theoretical language, then current across numerous fields of invention, to talk about the living quality of Hawaiian culture in a way that was misframed, I think, by her critics and led to hard feelings, yes. But if one reads her work, she writes an article called Tradition, Genuine or Spurious. That is true or not true, basically. And she says that distinction is not helpful. What's helpful is to talk about tradition as process, something always unfolding.
Right, and that's why I said it may be falsely accused of having pointed to certain traditional Hawaiian practices and said that they were not authentic.
I would say falsely understood.
Okay, falsely understood.
Yeah.
But amongst certain Hawaiian circles, she became persona non grata, right?
That's my historical understanding for some, yes.
Yeah, and that was why she left the University of Hawaii.
I can't speak to that. I don't know why she left. There's a historical coincidence, to be sure.
Let me, I want to show you your article, Authenticity, Invention, Articulation. Do you have it with you by any chance?
I do not.
Okay. May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes. And is that a marked exhibit?
It's marked as C46.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Yeah, please. So, Is it? It seems like there's an overlay on the projector somehow.
Yeah, it's your projector needs to be turned off.
Do you mind if I close this?
Please.
Wait, just a minute.
Wait.
Your projector needs to be turned off.
There we go.
If I may, Your Honor, I just asked Mr. Ono about this document, C46, and I'm just checking again. I think he says he doesn't believe it's uploaded yet. So I'm not sure that everyone would have a copy of this document. So no real objection, except that not everyone will have a chance to look at it unless we look at it up on the screen.
I see. Mr. Ono, do you happen to know if this has been uploaded to the documents library?
It has not been.
Okay. So would you happen to have sufficient copies for others?
I do not. I'm sorry.
Perhaps it's a good time to take a break. Why don't we take a 1-hour lunch break, and then we can you can share whatever copies you can. Okay. Main thing is Mr. Kaiama has one.
He does.
And I will return mine to you for further sharing. Let's take a break until 1:10, please. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
You're watching Naleo TV.
Contested case hearing for the 30-meter telescope project, a proceeding for the State of Hawaii, DLNR, Board of Land and Natural Resources.